The destroyer's YJ-18 cruise missiles, capable of striking within minutes, now threatened an American carrier strike group guarding vital shipping lanes worth trillions of dollars in annual trade. In seconds, the calm would shatter and what followed would become a lesson in modern warfare. The first warning came seconds after the Chinese destroyer surged ahead. Deep inside the USS Princeton's Combat Information Center, the SPY-1 radar tracked the vessel closing fast, its fire control signature leaving no doubt about its intent. At the same time, 25,000 feet overhead, an E-2D Hawkeye circling in its orbit picked up multiple J-15 fighters clawing skyward from the Shandong. The air picture was unmistakable. Beijing was escalating, pushing the confrontation into the skies. Out on the water, dozens of civilian ships continued their routine transits, unaware of how quickly their safety now depended on American resolve. A Singapore-flagged container ship, loaded with semiconductors, plowed ahead at 18 knots, bound for California. Just a few miles away, a South Korean LNG tanker worth nearly $200 million rode heavy with natural gas, her crew staring at radar screens that suddenly lit up with military echoes. Every vessel in a 30-mile radius now sat inside a potential kill zone, their fate tied to whether the U.S. Navy could hold the line. The atmosphere on the bridge grew thick, every officer weighing the stakes. One miscalculation, one nervous trigger pull, and the South China Sea would erupt into chaos. The tension was palpable like a drawn bowstring, stretched to its limit, waiting for the snap that could ignite a conflict no one claimed to want, but both sides seemed willing to risk. The tension on the bridge did not linger long. Within minutes of the Chinese destroyer's aggressive move and the Hawkeye's warning of J-15 second climbing from the Shandong, the USS Princeton and her escorts shifted into full combat readiness. General quarters sounded, bulkhead doors slammed shut, and sailors hurried to their stations. Deep in the Combat Information Center, fire control solutions updated in real time, feeding a picture of every Chinese contact across the strike group's network. The message was clear: any misstep could spark a fight at sea. High above the carrier, the U.S. response began to unfold, with quiet precision. From the deck of the USS Nimitz, a pair of MQ-25 Stingray Drive 1s roared off the catapults, their long wings glinting in the midday sun. Unlike the Chinese J-15 second straining for altitude, these unmanned aircraft climbed steadily, transmitting sensor data across the battle network and extending the group's eyes hundreds of miles beyond the horizon. Moments later, the first wave of FA-18E Super Hornets leapt skyward, each pilot sliding seamlessly into the unfolding formation, linked not only by voice, but by an invisible lattice of real-time data. Trailing them came the EA-18 Graham Growlers, America's airborne electronic hammer. Their ALQ-99 jamming pods powered up, flooding the ether with pulses that scrambled enemy sensors. On Chinese scopes, the clean blips of American fighters blurred into ghostly phantoms. 4 contacts became 12, then 20. For every signal the Chinese radar operators thought they tracked, the Growlers painted 3 more that didn't exist. What Beijing hoped would be a show of strength quickly began to resemble a trap of their own making. Beneath the waves, silent and unseen, the Navy's ace in the hole lurked in perfect patience. A Virginia-class attack submarine had been shadowing the Chinese formation for days, slipping undetected through the currents. From its position southwest of the Shandong, the sub's sonar arrays captured every screw turn, every noisy cavitation of the lumbering Type 039 diesel boat. The Americans knew exactly where the Chinese submarine was, how fast it was moving, and how vulnerable it would be if war broke out. It was a carefully balanced picture. Drones scanning from above, fighters ready to intercept, Growlers distorting the enemy's senses, and a silent predator beneath the surface. Together, they formed a lattice of power that turned the strike group into a fortress at sea. The United States was not merely reacting, it was positioning itself for dominance should the first missile fly. The first Chinese J-15 second broke through the haze just minutes after the Growlers had saturated the battle space with electronic noise. They came on hard, noses up, engines straining as they clawed for altitude. But the flaws of the Shandong ski jump launch system were already obvious. Without catapults, the fighters lifted off with reduced fuel and a lighter weapons load. Every second of hard climb bled precious fuel, cutting their combat endurance to little more than a handful of minutes. The American controllers aboard the Hawkeye didn't need to be told these pilots were flying uphill battles before the fight had even begun. Waiting for them, the FA-18E Super Hornets formed into the Navy's signature wall. 3 tiers of fighters spread across the sky, high cover at 35,000 feet, mid-tier at 25,000, and low cover at 15,000, creating overlapping kill zones that left no approach uncovered. It was a formation perfected over decades of air combat exercises, designed to trap any opponent in a tightening vise. The J-15 second, bunched tightly to maintain visual contact in the absence of reliable data links, now faced a net they could not outfly. Overhead, the MQ-25 Stingrays extended the Super Hornets' reach, refueling fighters on the fly and ensuring that endurance would never be an American weakness. While the Chinese burned through their limited tanks just to stay aloft, the Hornets topped off and pressed forward with fuel to spare. The imbalance grew more obvious with every passing minute. The U.S. could stay in the fight indefinitely, while the Chinese clock ticked down from the moment they launched. Desperate to shift the momentum, one J-15 pilot broke formation and dove straight at a Super Hornet in a reckless close pass. The maneuver was pure intimidation, a thump, as fighter pilots called it. But the American pilot had been trained in Top Gun, where such stunts were dissected and countered as routine. With a flick of the wrist, the drone diverted, slid behind the J-15, and locked onto its glowing engines. Inside his helmet-mounted display, the AIM-9X Sidewinder crosshairs turned bright red. For 3 heartbeats, the Chinese jet was dead to rights. One squeeze of the trigger and it would have been nothing but wreckage tumbling into the sea. The trigger was never pulled. Professional discipline held, the Hornet pilot breaking off as quickly as he had maneuvered in. But the message was unmistakable. The Americans had the Chinese exactly where they wanted them. Outmatched, outmaneuvered, and out of time. Every second the J-15 second stayed in the fight, their tanks ran drier, their options narrower, and their odds of survival slimmer. The air war had begun, and already it leaned heavily in America's favor. The skies were already tilting against Beijing when the danger at sea escalated. At 9:47, the Chinese Type O-52D destroyer raised the stakes to a new level. Its Type 346 ampere phased array radar stopped sweeping and locked directly onto the USS Nimitz with fire-controlled precision. In naval warfare, that was the equivalent of pointing a loaded gun at someone's chest. Inside the Princeton's Combat Information Center, alarms buzzed, but the crew held steady. American fire control radars remained in standby, but firing solutions updated second by second. Every ship in the Carrier Strike Group Princeton, Chung-Hoon Kid, had the destroyer in its sights. SM-6 interceptors, Tomahawks, and even 5-inch naval guns were primed. The Chinese ship might have lit up the Nimitz, but everyone in that formation knew the destroyer wouldn't survive 5 minutes if shooting started. Meanwhile, the threat below the waves demanded attention. To cover the blind spots of sonar pickets, an MQ-9 Reaper Drive 1 was dispatched from a forward base, skimming the waves at low altitude. Its sensors swept the area, where analysts suspected a Chinese Type 039 diesel-electric submarine was lurking. Within minutes, the suspicion became confirmation. The sub had made a rookie mistake. It raised its snorkel to recharge batteries. For sonar operators aboard the Princeton, it was like a freight train roaring through an empty tunnel. The submarine's acoustic signature, already cataloged in U.S. databases, was now painted with exact bearings and range. The Virginia-class attack submarine shadowing the Chinese task force had also fixed its position. Crosshairs set long before the Chinese crew realized they were exposed. If war broke out, the Type 039 would have less than 12 seconds to contemplate its life choices before a rocket-assisted torpedo from an ASROC turned it into a boiling patch of seawater. What unfolded in those tense minutes was a duel of discipline. The Chinese destroyer locked on, daring a reaction. Their submarine poked its head up, thinking it was unseen. But the Americans documented everything, quietly tightening the noose. From the surface to the skies to the ocean depths, the Carrier Strike Group had every angle covered. The fight hadn't gone kinetic yet, but the balance was unmistakable. If the first shot was fired, the South China Sea would belong to the U.S. Navy within minutes. The radar lock from the Chinese destroyer lingered for less than a minute before switching back to search mode, but by then the entire battle space had entered a new phase. Escalation was no longer confined to a single axis, it was spreading across every domain at once. In the skies, the EA-18 Graham Growlers continued their invisible assault. Their jamming pods poured so much electronic noise into the ether that Chinese operators no longer trusted their own screens. Contacts appeared and vanished in seconds. Ghost fleets materialized where there were none. To an inexperienced radar crew, it looked as if the U.S. strike group had multiplied threefold. The truth was simpler. The Growlers were turning their sensors into chaos, and chaos meant hesitation. On the surface, the USS Princeton launched a Scan Eagle UAV, a small but persistent set of eyes circling low above the sea. Its camera relayed a constant feed of the waters near the suspected submarine, hunting for disturbances or periscopes that might betray its presence. With merchant traffic nearby, the drone ensured there would be no surprises on the surface. Even a submarine forced to snorkel again would find no cover. Below the waves, the real power shift was taking shape. The Virginia-class submarine, which had been shadowing the Chinese formation in patient silence, began a deliberate creep closer to the Shandong. The move was risky, bold, and calculated to make a point. Within torpedo range, the Virginia-class effectively owned the undersea fight. If the Chinese carrier group had imagined itself secure under a protective screen, that illusion was gone. The Americans held fire, but the restraint was deliberate, not weakness. Every radar lock, every sonar ping, every drone image was cataloged and shared across the strike group. From the Chinese perspective, they were surrounded fighters above, destroyers to the flanks, submarines beneath, and electronic warfare clouding every decision. It was a suffocating kind of dominance, not by pulling the trigger, but by showing at every level that the U.S. Navy already controlled the fight. The result was a psychological vice. The Chinese had come to intimidate, but now they were the ones hemmed in. Every move observed, every option narrowed. The Americans hadn't fired a shot, yet the message was unmistakable. One order from the captain, and the entire Chinese formation could be erased from the South China Sea. By mid-afternoon, the standoff reached its breaking point. At exactly 14:30, the USS Nimitz unleashed a spectacle of raw power, nearly 50 aircraft roaring off her deck in rapid succession. Super Hornets, Growlers, and MQ-25 Stingrays clawed into the sky at 45-second intervals, their contrails carving a white lattice across the South China Sea. What had begun as a tense chess match now became a wall of American steel, stretching from horizon to horizon. The MQ-25 immediately went to work, relaying target-quality data across the formation and topping off Hornets to extend their reach. Every fighter carried precise cues, every sensor picture shared across the strike group in real time. The Growlers layered their jamming on top, drowning Chinese radars in a storm of false echoes until the picture on their screens was indistinguishable from static. For Beijing's commanders, the battlefield had dissolved into ghosts and shadows, while for the Americans it had never been clearer. Then came the coup de grace. Just 6 nautical miles from the Shandong, a Virginia-class attack submarine broke the surface, black hull glistening in the afternoon sun. Water cascaded off her sail as Chinese lookouts froze in disbelief. For 8 days she stalked this unseen, and now she surfaced purely for a minute. Within 90 seconds she was gone again, sliding beneath the waves, but the message was devastatingly clear. The U.S. owned the undersea domain, and the Chinese carrier was already lost in any real war. By early evening, the outcome was unmistakable. The J-15 running on fumes, peeled away and limped back to the Shandong, while the Type O-52D destroyer broke contact, its fire control gamble exposed as hollow. Below the surface, the Chinese submarine had already been cataloged and cornered, stripped of any credibility as a hidden threat. Beijing's show of force had unraveled, leaving only the quiet retreat of its fleet. Strategically, the lesson was undeniable. The South China Sea would not become China's private lake so long as American technology, discipline, and joint warfare